Our next reader, Carol Graham, is a Texas transplant and a designated driver who reads and writes with equal enthusiasm. Her recent book, Passion in Park Slope, it's all in caps, is a murder mystery that takes place in Brooklyn, where she has occasionally thought of killing a few people, but she never has, really, not once. Carol Graham.
Once upon a time in New Mexico, I fell in love and it took a while to climb out. The object of my affection was a hot guy in ski pants who was an adrenaline junkie. His exploits made me want to witness those adventures and a time or two participate myself. He was a skier, a windsurfer, a hang glider pilot, and the hang gliding stories I heard were so thrilling that I said sure when he offered to teach me to fly. So come spring, I was hanging with him and the other guys in the pack of pilots in a '74 Land Cruiser, toting them up to the launch sites. One afternoon, when there was not enough wind for them to take off from their usual launch on the mountain, we decided that it was perfect for a lesson for me on the Trainer Hill a few miles away. I was nervous but psyched. I had on my big clunky hiking boots, shorts, and a t-shirt, and I found myself standing in a very flat meadow dotted with cactus and a scrub brush that these guys were calling a hill, helmet on, and a giant kite resting on my shoulders. Since there was virtually no wind, my job was to run down this not much of a hill with the glider, and hopefully I'd run fast enough that the air passing over the wing would lift slightly and I'd leave the ground for a few inches. That was the goal. Run hard, they yelled, so I gave it my all, but somebody should have suggested running shoes because those heavy-duty hikers were not made for sprinting. I took off and immediately tripped over a rock, or maybe my own feet, and started tumbling across the terrain, giant kites still attached. When I came to a stop, I was laying entangled with the 3-foot-high cholla cactus. My friends dragged me to my feet to dust me off, but every stroke affirmed that my backside, from waist to ankle, was embedded with inch-long thorns. I was trying not to cry, and when my well-meaning friends tried to yank them out, they just broke off. It was excruciating, so I ended up in the ER with my bare butt exposed to a doctor, a nurse, and a physician's assistant with tweezers. It took a long time to remove them all, and longer still to get over the embarrassment. I never returned to the Trainer Hill. I would drive that Land Cruiser to the top of mountains they'd delightedly fly off, and I would drive the empty vehicle down to the landing zone. The guys called me their hang driver pilot, but deep down, I wanted that look of delight they got on my face. After a few years, my pilot got a tandem glider, and my opportunity to fly was reborn. I would be a passenger, you see, so I could bypass the Trainer Hill. My thinking was that mild to no wind was the reason for that fiasco, so I decided that stiff winds coming up the face of the cliff was the answer. One Sunday morning, the winds were blowing like stink, and I felt sure that this was the day. So we loaded up the gear, the beer, and the boys, and took off for the nearly 3,000-foot launch site in Alamogordo. I stood on the edge of the cliff with the wind blowing so hard I was almost moving backwards, and my stomach was churning with anxiety. So I may have had a few beers, for medicinal purposes. There we were, hooked in, and one of the guys holding onto the nose of the glider to keep it from taking off. I mean, the wind was that strong. Before I could chicken out, wait, that's not what I meant. While I still had the courage of my convictions, we stood on the face of that 3,000-foot drop, and as soon as my pilot said clear, we took off and went straight up. The wind felt like gale force to me, and my pilot's arms were straining to muscle the control bar. We were circling higher and higher, but it was like being on a roller coaster or a bucking bronco. We were being tossed around like crazy, and my helmeted head was slamming into the side of the control bar every few seconds. I looked over at my pilot, and his jaw was clenched. I shouted, "Is it always like this?" And he gave me a bright little smile. "Fun, right?" That's when I threw up, over and over again, all over Alamogordo, New Mexico. We finally landed about 45 minutes later, and I kissed the ground. I would have kissed the guy, but I had vomit all over my face. It turns out that was not a typical flight, and I ended up giving it another try on another day, but we dined out on that punchline for years. There's nothing like blowing your beats at 9,000 feet.